The Vale sisters. Lean closer, child. There's a place where the earth is soft as memory and louder than thunder. A place where people once spoke in whispers because paper would not carry their truth. I will tell you about that place tonight. I will tell you about 3 girls whose names were not written, but whose sound was. If your heart is quiet, you might feel a little vibration before we are done. That is not fear. That is the spirit of remembering. Now, let's begin. The arrival. In the lowlands of Louisiana, where the river braids itself like a long silver ribbon, and the cane fields lean their heavy heads toward water, there stood a house called Willow Vale. Time once polished it bright. Columns white as bleached bone. Windows tall as sermons. A house built to see and be seen, but never to listen. Yet everything important that ever happened there began with listening. The year was 1846, or so the church calendars claimed. The sky could not be troubled with numbers. It kept its own timing. On a night when the clouds pressed down and the air tasted of iron, a woman labored in a cabin just beyond the light of the big house. She did not have a doctor, just a fearful friend. She did not have clean linens. She had her breath, and she had the unhelpful company of time which never pauses for grief or joy. By the second hour, the wind rose. By the third, the door rattled like a tooth in a child's mouth. And by the fourth, there came a cry, thin and bright, then another, and then, strange mercy, one more. Count them, 1, 2, 3 cries, braided so neatly that a listener might have thought it was one sound made 3 times rather than 3 sounds born at once. The mother cupped her identical daughters with shaking hands and gave them secret names she could not write and would not share. 3 shiny faces looking out from the thin blanket. Selah, for the relieving pause after a hard truth. Selva, for the glistening sea she hoped she would witness. Sora, for the thing that rises though it is meant to be held down. The cabin smelled of rain, sweat, and raw hope. The mother knew that hope is the first thing a master will try to take. Before the names had cooled on her lips, the door opened to sturdy boots. Men who made themselves heavy so the floorboards would learn fear. They came to count with their eyes and collect with their hands. The woman's body had worked a miracle. The world around her had no use for miracles. That is the business of heaven. Fields and ledgers want only yields. They took the babies from the warmth that made them possible. They spoke of the master's interest, the master's curiosity, the master's plans, and not once did they speak of the mother's heart. She watched as her 3 chocolate-colored jewels were carried into the darkness beneath the huge white house. Her mind sank into a deep cotton bin world. The sound was muffled, and the fluffy white stuff of pain covered her face, her eyes, her nose. No breath could enter or escape, just soft, unpredictably prickly silence. As she lay on her thin mat, with hot tears meandering down her face, she heard it. Faint at first, indistinct. Ah, she heard it. The cellar. Willow Vale had a cellar that did not like to be remembered. Houses keep their lies underground. It is convenient to call them foundations. The cellar's floor was damp with an old sorrow no one had cleaned. The walls seeped a moist pain. The iron rings in those walls had stories of their own, but iron has never been much of a talker. You have to listen with the softness of your bones to hear iron tell you anything true. The bundle of newborns was given to the care of two other slave girls. Both had given birth only weeks before. Their child's care would come last. They were all situated in a corner of the cellar that pretended to be better than nothing. The triplets rarely cried. When they did, their cries seemed to come from one source. It was less a cry and more a bone-vibrating song. It moved you. It seeped under the door, sank into the earth, and spread its fingers wide. The tiny girls were attentive. Their eyes were always scanning the darkness and the subtle light when it presented itself. They learned voices and footsteps as other children learn the songs of birds. They learned the language of movement, the comings and goings. They learned that daylight can be present in a room without ever entering the room. The little girl's song by now was not just ever present, but seemed to carry indecipherable words woven into their tone. All who heard it, that was everyone, grew nervous at the unique sound. As the months passed, the little girls continued to sing. The earth vibrated. People grew more anxious. Rumors of curses and the end of the world began to float among the slave cabins. Most were silent. The others whispered. All were fearful of the consequences. The master of Willow Vale liked his knowledge in neat lines. Whispers of evil spirits, witchcraft, and curses did not fit into neat lines. He invited men who wore their certainty like coats. They arrived with instruments, notebooks, and smiles trained to bend downward at the exact moment empathy might have risen. They measured skulls, counted eyelashes, recorded pulses, and probed private places. They spoke of rarity, of replication, of God and design, as though a quiet God might be persuaded to testify to their expertise. But there was something none of them could tally. When the girls grew restless and the house grew still, a sound began. It did not start with a throat. It started the way dew starts, everywhere at once. Sella found a note so low the floor understood it. Selva found a note that turned corners without raising its voice. And Sora, sweet Sora, held them both until the shape of a third note appeared, a ribbon pulled from nothing. The three sounds did not sit beside one another. They inhabited each other like rooms in a well-built home. And in that sound the house heard, perhaps for the first time, what a house could be. The doctors wrote what they could. They liked the word phenomenon. It had just enough syllables to disguise their helplessness. They favored theories that ended with periods and never asked anyone's permission to stop probing. The master favored results. The seller favored secrets. The girls favored each other. So Time and the girls crawled, toddled, and confidently walked past. A mother's love is a visitor that gets through every kind of locked door. She was given kitchen duties now and then. She wiped plates that would never be hers and carried water as though it were the only wealth the world could not counterfeit. She secreted food in her apron pocket and passed it to the caretakers in the hallways, always wordlessly, but her eyes screamed gratitude and pain. When she passed the stairs that went down into the stone cellar, she pressed her palm against the wood. Wood knows the truth of hands. The girls did not answer with words. The world had shown them what it does with the words of girls. Their sound did not stop. It shifted. It was subtle, like the way a creek's voice darkens when it slips under shade. The mother knew they knew she was there. Knowing is not the same as holding, but it is not nothing. These young beings were unmoved by the master's attempts at control. They never spoke. Only the humming sounds varied in volume. On a Tuesday, the master decided that his plantation science would be served by hunger. No food or drink for days. Their song changed, but their rhythmic and synchronized movements did not. Their unearthly stare bore into the master's forehead like slow drops of water boring a hole in a rock, unrelenting. On a Friday, he decided discipline would be better served by the lash. To the absolute horror of the master and the overseer, the lash never landed. It moved under its own power. Despite multiple attempts, the leather never touched the little girls. While the overseer wielded the handle, the lash itself refused to obey. Two overseers suddenly resigned, complaining of disturbing dreams and visions they could not explain. The following week, the master decided separation might teach the lesson of control he yearned. He wanted to break this sound into three honest pieces. Masters often confuse breaking with teaching. He was perpetually confused. In each decision, the girls met an evil blade with a softness that did not yield. Sella learned how to hum through an empty stomach and fill it with something older than food. Selva learned to hum while another's pain reached for her like lightning reaches for a tree. Sora learned how to hum across distance so that space itself became a liar. The sound did not grow loud, it grew inevitable. It did not ask for attention. It claimed it the way the dawn claims the sky, without apology. Control continued to elude the master. The house learns to listen. Servants heard it first, as servants always do. They are the ears of a place, though no one pays them for hearing. The field hands said they slept better on nights when the tone deepened. Children played a game of guessing which note belonged to which sister, and the children never guessed wrong. Slave mothers whispered of a knowing in their belly about the weather, a lingering sickness, an upcoming loss and joys. They were calmed by the sound. In the big rooms, the overseers poured more drink than they could carry and told one another to stop flinching at nothing. In the master's chamber, a mirror cracked, not because glass has a temper, but because truth will push against whatever lies in front of it until something yields. You might ask why a sound matters. You might say a sound is air with ideas about itself. But a song is a map when paper is forbidden. A song is a door when doors are promised to other people. A song is a kind of law that no court can repeal. The Vale sisters had no ink. They had no hinge. So they wrote their survival into the medium that touches everything: breath. By the end of spring, the doctors had learned nothing they could charge extra for. Their notes thinned. The master's patience did what patience always does when it tries to live without humility. It spoiled. He told himself that hunger had not been severe enough. He told himself that a whip prefers a certain wrist. He told himself that separation was merely a rehearsal. He told himself things a man says when he wishes to continue believing lies about who he is. The storm. It came at dusk when the herons were counting their steps. The sky unrolled a sheet of pewter, and the cane leaves shivered with a proprietary fear. Lightning came down like a verdict. It bleached the entire landscape. In the cabin, the mother sat upright, knowing the storm had business with her 4-year-old daughters. In the big house, the master stood at a window and convinced himself the weather had no literacy. He should have wondered if the weather had ears. The sound rose. No, that's not exactly right. It did not rise as much as it came nearer. Thunder spoke its old syllables and found itself echoed, not mocked, by a music it did not make. The house groaned in the polite way a proud thing groans when it encounters an older pride. The hinges of the cellar door startled. A lamp trembled. The girls watched. After the storm, the air tasted like old coins and forgiveness. The sisters slept. The house did not. In the morning, the master complained of pain under his ribs. He told himself it was a pulled muscle. The body often records what the mind refuses to sign. The ledger and lie. A ledger is a man's way of pretending he has the final word. Numbers look so clean, don't they? They look like answers. The master sharpened a pencil and unsharpened a truth. In a column that had waited a long time to matter, he entered a line that said something like common illness, and something like loss, and something like singular where plural lived. He spat orders to the new overseer in a voice of panic, telling him to keep everyone's mouth tighter than knots. In the quarters, a woman hummed the sister's notes while stirring a pot. Across the yard, a child fell asleep touching the vibrating floorboards. The doctors, whose visits were less and less predictable, packed their instruments neatly and left without their bravado. Later, they would try to remember how to speak without stuttering when the subject of triplet slave girls dared to be uttered. Months passed. The master's pain sharpened. He walked with his hand to his side like a man holding the last of his pride together. He sent for a preacher to remind the Lord who owed whom. The preacher came with a Bible and a fear he would not name. He quoted David and spared his throat the work of repentance. Despite knowing the rumors, he never asked questions about the cellar. Cowardice looks tidy in a collar. The night of going. Several nights later, it happened. The sky saved its rain for later. The air held its breath. The cane held its whisper. Even the frogs postponed their nightly chorus. Those with a reason to be awake were awake. Those without a reason found one. Near midnight, a spark announced itself in the pantry like a rude guest who believes he has been invited. Sparks always have cousins. They arrived running. Heat moved the way gossip moves, fast, low, through dry places, pleased with its own retelling. Fire found the stairs and took them two at a time. The master shouted orders to men who were already doing what they could. Water decided to be slow at the worst possible moment. Flames rose. The house slowly forgot who it was. In the cellar, the sisters stood. Sella took Selva's hand. Selva took Sora's. They did not ask permission from the air or ash. They did not sing a high, brave song. They did not sing at all. They made the smallest possible sound that is still a sound, the way a mother makes the smallest possible touch that is still a touch. Somewhere, an iron ankle ring decided it had been a circle too long. Somewhere, a lock divorced its key. Somewhere, a door that had been trained to hold its tongue found a word. When the smoke cleared enough to make room for morning, there were cups on the floor, bowls on their sides, and chains arranged like handwriting the master could not read. The girls were not there. The straw mat did not know where they had gone. The stones only hummed. The portion of the main house above the cellar was gone. The soot and water dripped in ebony streams along the master's whitewashed walls of his personal cathedral. What people said. Every place tells its story by committee. In the yard, they said they saw 3 small figures walking, not running, across the space between the house and the woods, as though the ground were clearing a path. At the river, there were footprints. Someone found 3 marks on a cypress tree, like a signature that didn't need to be legible to be true. In the kitchen, a girl said she heard, just before dawn, a sound like a bee under glass and a voice saying, almost too softly to believe, "Go now." She told her aunt, then took it back and told it again. That is how truth travels when it has been beaten once or twice. In the big rooms, men preferred a theory with no footprints in it. They said the fire took them. They said the smoke smothered what the lash could not tame. They said the river owed them 3 bodies and had failed to pay. They said it in voices that wanted so badly to be obeyed they forgot to be convincing. A lie can command obedience. It cannot command rest. The mother did not go to the ruins. She sat in the shade and listened to the air, listening not for her daughter's sound, but for the sound of the world without her daughters. She found that it was not quiet. A bird scolded the idea of ownership of any sound. A squirrel chattered at a religion of ledgers. The wind blew through the scorched trees, whispering yes and no at the same time. Intentionally indecisive? Then, somewhere deep inside her, where grief keeps a small, clean room for mystery, she heard 3 notes not exactly as she had heard them before. Not the young notes, not the hungry notes. Older notes, steady enough to carry a woman across a day without dropping her. She closed her eyes and let the yes of that be enough. After the fire, the house did not die. It learned how to haunt differently. Time took the roof first. Rain practiced itself on the stairwell. Mice misplaced themselves in the moldings. Vines graduated with honors. When strangers came, they felt a small vibration underfoot, like a warning or a welcome, depending on what they had brought with them. Those who had come to take felt unwelcome. Those who had come to listen were surprised to discover they had been expected. The war came and learned what all wars eventually learn, that fire looks like victory until numbers are counted and only hunger remains. The paper that once said who owned whom tried to learn a new vocabulary. Some men spoke of freedom as if it were a language they were borrowing. Some women spoke it as if it were a language they had been making in their sleep all along. The river took some names and returned others with different spellings. Willow Vale became a memory of itself. People began saying ruin when they really meant reminder. A generation later, Workers clearing cane at the property line said their machetes sang out of tune at a certain spot, as if steel had met a hymn by accident. Children dared one another to sit on the cellar stones at dusk and came back reporting nothing and everything. A preacher's daughter stood by the old front steps and said it felt like a cat purring in the ground. Her father told her to hush, then later asked her what a purr feels like when nobody can see the animal. The letter. A letter turned up in a shop, the way truth turns up when it is bored with hiding. It had belonged to one of the measuring men, a doctor. Most of the words had faded letters. What could be read said that the little girl's sound persisted and that ordinary categories did not help. The writer insisted he was of sound mind and not dreaming. At the bottom, in a hand that had forgotten the arrogance of the hand at the top, there were 4 words: "They don't stop singing." It is easy to mock a frightened man. It is harder to remember that fear is sometimes what finally makes a person honest. The letter traveled without a stamp, the way a rumor travels without permission. It reached a woman who had never learned her grandmother's proper maiden name because paper in those days preferred more respectable subjects. She held the page to her chest and laughed once, the kind of laugh that catches kindness by surprise. She had been taught to be grateful for handsome words spoken from a pulpit. That day, she was grateful for ugly words spoken from a study. They were truer. How the story stayed. You will want to ask for proof. You are a child of a century that believes proof is the only door. Proof is a door. It is not the only one. The story moved mouth to mouth, shelf to shelf, lullaby to working song to whispered warning. Women put 3 stitches closer together at the cuff when they mended. Men carved a small sign on the underside of a bench where fingers could find it. Boys learned to press an ear to the floor and not pretend it was silly. Girls learned the 3 notes and taught them to their daughters and sometimes to their sons if the sons had the good sense to listen. A music teacher who came to the parish years later and wrote down a little fragment of a tune he heard at a picnic and used it in a hymn for a different town in a different state. The hymn spread. People sang it and did not know they were carrying 3 little girls across a country on Sunday mornings. That is the tenderest kind of victory, when a thing that was meant to be erased becomes part of daily bread. The road back. I went once, long after anyone had a right to tell me not to. The path is overgrown. The trees were generous with shade. I stood where a staircase had been and looked at a piece of sky that had been the ceiling. I pressed my palm to a stone warmed by years that did not know me. I did not hear a song. I felt a suggestion. It was like remembering a name when you weren't trying to, and then pretending you'd had it all along. The suggestion said nothing about fire. It said nothing about punishment. It said nothing about the man who wrote the letter, or the man who wrote the ledger, or the woman who learned to live with her hands empty and her heart full. It said a word so small that men with titles forget how to spell it. It said, together. The ledger's last trick. There are those who say the sisters did not exist because their names are nowhere to be found. A book with a hard cover is a fine liar when it wants to be. Paper is a field that can refuse certain seeds, but breath remembers, wood remembers. A floorboard that has learned a child's weight does not forget. A door that once had to choose between open and closed becomes a better teacher than any printed page. When the old master died, as damage must, his will did not mention the cellar. That omission tells you more than a paragraph could. His children sold what they could and prayed that whatever made the house shiver would not follow the money. Money always thinks it can outrun consequences. Consequence owns faster shoes. The mother's end. The mother grew old enough to look almost like herself again. That is what age gives a woman who has been borrowed for too long. People said she smiled more as the years took away her speed. They said she liked to sit on the step and hum what company would mistake for nothing. She left no letters. She left no embroidered handkerchief with initials that would break your heart. She left, in the air around where she had once lived, a feeling like a hand on a child's back when the child is pretending not to be afraid. When she died, those who loved her put 3 little stones where their money could not buy marble. They never told the preacher why, and the preacher never asked. Sometimes holiness is not a performance, it is a courtesy. Some understandings are simply privacy doing its job. A house learns to be land. The last beam fell. The last nail gave up. A sapling that had been politely waiting decided it had waited long enough. The cellar stones sat and did not apologize for being the only part of the house that had ever told the truth. People came by and left bottles filled with flowers picked from the roadside, which is one kind of prayer, and sometimes they left nothing, which is another kind of prayer. The question you came with: where did the children go? People want a map with a red line, dots, and an arrow, and a caption beneath the arrow reading North. I will not lie. I do not know where their feet rested the night after the fire. I do not know whether a boat met them, or a friend, or a star. I do not know whether a fence or a river did the final work. I do know this. Not every leaving creates a road. Some leavings look like a note the world has been waiting to hear since it started keeping time. Some leavings look like a decision you make and then make again with every breath until breath decides it's had enough. Perhaps they lived in a town whose name was changed twice before it learned the one it could keep. Perhaps they had children one day with a laugh too big to be sensible. Perhaps they found rooms where their sound did not need to be brave. Or perhaps they became what the house believed they already were, the part of a place that will not forget itself. There is more than one way not to die. The hum that stays. Now, if you have listened with your ribs and not only with your ears, you will notice a small quiet at the end of my telling. It is not the quiet of nothing. It is the quiet of a note held just long enough that another note could join if it chose. The Vale sisters were born into a night that many thought was the end of something. It was the start of a sound that has not learned how to stop. If you find yourself hearing it later while washing a dish or pausing on a stair, do not explain it away. Some things do not come to be explained, they come to be carried. If ever you feel the faintest vibration under your feet, do not be troubled. Say the names that are not written. Say them the way a person says grace when there is barely enough to go around, and then there is. Their names: Sela, Selva, Sora. Now sit quietly and let your bones do their listening. And that, my child, is where I will leave you. Walk softly. The earth is singing.